The wizard. Today, since I didn't do this episode on last week, on Friday or Thursday, whatever it was, going to do it today. Part 24 on chapter 4 of the Anarchy Works book. So, this section, we're going to go over what about global environmental problems like climate change. In the last section, we talked about how do, let me see the title. What's to stop someone from destroying the environment, right? And that was a great section because it showed us that in an anarchist kind of community, or really any community in which there is no hierarchical structure, kind of controlling, what is legal to do and what's not. What you actually have is people keep themselves and each other in check more um, fluidly, like not fluidly, but more easily and simply, really. Right? They showed examples of people um, from egalitarian people who were in a kind of island setting versus people who were in a hierarchical setting. So Easter Island, they were hierarchical versus they mentioned, I forgot the other folks, and I forgot the exact name, but you can read them up. You can read this section yourself. But they are in an island over by the Philippines area. And the difference is that the more egalitarian people, right, when they saw that they were running out of pigs, for instance, right, or and when it took so much effort, so many resources to farm for pigs in order to eat, they banned it. They said no more eating pigs. We can't sustain it, right? And they didn't need some other government or some higher government to tell them what to do. So it's just all the people got together and were like, hey, if we keep eating pigs, there'll be no more pigs, and we can't keep farming pigs because it eats up all the other resources that we have on this island, right? And so people just just like when you talk with your friend and you decide if you want to go to movies or what you want to eat, right? You just sit there as peers and have a conversation, right? And that's what they did with their entire society, their entire community. But in Easter Island, right, where you have a king or some, royalty, and they want, power, they say, "Oh, you go out and build me a statue. Doesn't matter how it's done, you go get it done," right? And so people got it done and cut off, tons of trees, all the, stuff in the area, and of course the royalties, they want more and more resources for themselves, and that means less and less for the people. And so what ended up happening on the Easter Island, cannibalism. All right, people started eating each other and all this other stuff, and everybody died out. That's kind of the fate of these hierarchical structures, is that the people in power are kind of blind to what's happening with the environment. If they're not, either they're blind or they literally don't care, right? They're psychopathic. They're psychopaths. They just do not care. And so when you have a hierarchical structure, right, that is when these environmental problems are more of an issue as opposed to when you have a egalitarian structure. So let's see how they answer about the global environmental problems, right? So because that is a different issue, right? If you're on your own local little space, then you can come up with problems and or come up with solutions together to solve your shared problem. But with something like a global environmental problem, right? Something that impacts everybody around the world, how do you collaborate, right? How do you communicate with people around the world who are not in your local area? We're seeing this problem now. So I'm really curious as to what he will say in this section. If I can make a prediction, I think he's going to, because I do like to make predictions in order to help facilitate my own learning. Um, oh, excuse me, sorry. Um, but my prediction is that he's going to say something along the lines of the fact that number one, if everybody in local communities, right, solve their own problems, right, solve their own climate issues, which usually means using less resources, stop polluting your land, don't take resources from other environments and things like that. If you stop doing those things and just focus on improving your local land, your local, community, your local environment, that will solve a lot of these problems with the global climate. And number two, you can still collaborate, right? An anarchist, or if you don't, if that word scares people, a peer-based community can still happen on a global level, right? When you actually have respect for people around the world, you don't have to depend on their government. You can just especially nowadays with the internet. and stuff like that. You just talk to somebody from around the world and say, hey, what can we do to solve the world's problem, to solve these big problems that we're all facing, right? Just work with them as peers rather than going up chain to their government and hope the government's idea of what they want to happen gets translated and it gets funneled back down the chain to the people in that country. Instead, just communicate directly with the peers, right? Directly with your peers in those countries. Then you can create these projects together. Oftentimes, it's these governments, these corporations, these hierarchies that are making it more difficult to communicate with people from across different, local areas than it is the actual people. But let's see what he says. um, Anarchists do not yet have experience dealing with global problems because our successes so far have only been local and temporary. Ooh, that's unfortunate, yeah. Stateless anarchist societies are once covered the world, but this was long before the existence of global environmental problems like those created by capitalism, right? And isn't that sad? Like we have to kind of clean up the problems created by capitalism because capitalism can't and won't create it, it won't fix it by themselves. Like it can't. It goes against the entire idea of capitalism. And I say that as a person who wanted to create and believe in human-centered capitalism and things like that. I was like, oh yes, let's center the incentives of profit and growth. Let's if we align it with the environment, right? If we align it with human needs, then maybe we can. No, yeah, it doesn't work. You can see this today with greenwashing, with blackwashing in terms of, Black Lives Matter and things like that, with rainbow washing, with, all these things. They just put the color of, oh yeah, we're doing good. And it's just doing the same old stuff behind the scenes. It's sad. Anyways, today, members of many of these indigenous societies are at the forefront of global resistance to the ecological destruction caused by governments and corporations, right? Exactly. Anarchists also coordinate resistance globally. They organize international protests against major polluters and their state backers, such as the mobilizations during the G8 summits that have convened hundreds of thousands of people from dozens of countries to demonstrate against the states most responsible for global warming and other problems. In response to the global activity of transnational corporations, ecologically minded anarchists share information globally. In this manner, activists around the world can coordinate simultaneous actions against corporations, targeting a polluting factory or mine or on one continent, retail stores on another continent, and an international headquarters or shareholders meeting on another continent. I like that idea. I've been thinking about, how can we do something like this, do like a multi-pronged, attack where you're trying to, you know, um, stop the destruction of the environment through just meeting people where they're at, right? In those different areas. I think that could be very powerful. For example, major protests, boycotts, and acts of sabotage against Shell Oil were coordinated among people in Nigeria, Europe, and the North America, okay, throughout the 1980s and 90s. In 1986, Autonomous in Denmark carried out multiple simultaneous fire bombings of Shell nations across the Shell station, sorry, across the country during a worldwide boycott to punish Shell for supporting the government responsible for apartheid in South Africa. Ooh, wow. In the Netherlands, the clandestine anti-authoritarian group RARA, Revolutionary Anti-Racist Action, carried out a campaign of non-lethal bombings against Shell Oil, playing a critical role in forcing Shell to pull out of South Africa. In 1995, when Shell wanted to dump an oil rig in the North Sea, it was forced to abandon its plans by protests in Denmark and the UK, an occupation of the oil rig by Greenpeace activists, and a firebombing and a shooting attack against Shell stations in two different cities in Germany. Goodness, sorry. My dog is going crazy. In Germany, as well as the boycott, have lords. Where was I? And a firebombing and shooting attack against Shell stations in two different cities in Germany, as well as a boycott that lowered sales by 10% in that country. Efforts such as these prefigure the decentralized global networks that could protect the environment and an anarchist future. If we succeed in abolishing capitalism and the state, we will have removed the greatest systemic goodness ravages of the environment, as well as the structural barriers that currently impede popular action in the defense of nature. Yeah, definitely, agree. There's so much Like once you remove like the main people who are causing these problems, right? We can create so much more change. We can actually make things happen. A lot of the things that people are trying to do today are not only are they incremental, but they're pointless, right? Because they're doing all this stuff on one side, but not even just ignoring everything that's happening on the other side, right? If you boycott a store, for instance, you say, oh, they're, they're not, using the right, they're polluting or whatever, right? If you just boycott that store, but you're not even we're thinking about, their supply chain, the laws in place that allows them to do this, their lobbying and stuff like that. If you don't think about any of that, that's not really gonna change much, right? They might just move the store out of your community and put it in somebody else's community, or they'll just fire everybody in that store, and then keep it moving online or something like that. Like you have to have a multi-pronged approach when you really want to affect change. At least that's how I see it. Um, these are historical examples. Did I just say? I don't know. I'll say it again. There are historical examples of stateless societies responding to large-scale collective environmental problems through decentralized networks. Though the problems were not global, the relative distances they face with information traveling at a pedestrian's pace were perhaps greater than the distances that mark today's world, in which people can communicate instantaneously even if they live on opposite sides of the planet. Exactly. I mentioned that. Tonga is a Pacific archipelago. Mouth getting dry. uh, Settled by Polynesian peoples. Before colonization, it had a centralized political system with a hereditary leader, but the system was far less centralized than a state, and the leader's coercive powers were limited. For 3,200 years, the people of Tonga were able to maintain sustainable practices over an archipelago of 288 square miles with tens of thousands of inhabitants. There were no communications technologies, so information traveled slowly. Tonga is too large for a single farmer to have knowledge of all the islands or even all of any of its large islands. The leader was traditionally able to guide and ensure sustainable practices not through to force or recourse to force, but because he had access to information from the entire territory, just as a federation or a general assembly would if the islanders organized themselves in that way. It was up to the individuals who made up the society to implement particular practices and support the idea of sustainability. The fact that a large population can protect the environment in a diffuse or decentralized manner without leadership is amply demonstrated by the aforementioned New Guinea Highlanders. Yeah, the New Guinea folks. Yeah. Agriculture usually leads to deforestation as land is cleared for fields, and deforestation can kill the soil. Many societies respond by clearing more land to compensate for lower soil productivity. Exactly, right? Thus aggravating the problem. So, just real quick, I had a podcast about this. The last podcast I made, I think last week, where I was mentioning how it's funny because we often view kind of um, um, delayed response. It's like there's two types of societies: immediate response societies, or no, I'm sorry, immediate return societies versus delayed return societies. Return societies are basically like the nomadic peoples, right, who hunt and forage for food every single day, or at least most days of the week, and then eat it in the same day or the same week. They don't really save for the future. But delayed return societies are the ones we're familiar with. That's how our society was built with agriculture and all this other stuff, right? And we often kind of see this as an evolution, right? As a going from less kind of conscious or mindful to more being able to abstract for the future and plan for the future and stuff like that, right? But when you think about it, a delayed return society is actually very problematic, right? It's because you're taking twice from the environment, right? It's inherently greedy because in an immediate return society where you're eating everything you get on that same day or that same week, you instantly realize that you can only take so much. If you see some berries on a tree, you can only take the berries that you're going to eat today, right? You're not going to take more berries than you're going to eat today because you could just come back tomorrow, right? And it's inherently sustainable because now you know that okay, you come back today, you come back tomorrow, or come back next week, and then you realize there's not enough berries anymore, so you have to move on. Yeah, this is why people are nomadic in those societies because after so much time it takes time for that tree to replenish those berries and or a bush or whatever, right? So you sit there and be like, okay, I can't stay here. I had to go to another place, to broader horizons, to greener pastures, or whatever you want to call it. But in a agricultural society, right? Um, well, before I get into that, in a nomadic culture, right? Once the resources are done, it could be berries, it could be meat too, like when you're killing deer, stuff like that. You realize that it takes a long time, right? This is the important part. It takes a period of time for nature to replenish itself. And if you stay there, you won't give it time to replenish. And so that's why they move along, right? They move to another place and then they actually come back. This is why many nomadic cultures use a like kind of like a cyclical route around their environment, because it takes, a season or 2 seasons or many seasons, right, before an area to replenish its resources to where it was before. That will sustain your way of life and your culture. So they regularly move around, and it's inherently more sustainable. But in an agricultural space, right, you farm, and because you're farming, you think, oh, I can control how much resources are here. Furthermore, you don't really pay attention to how much resources are there by default, right? You just think, okay, I want this resources here, and I can, farm, I can till the soil and make it happen, right? And it seems like a good thing. It seems like you're planning for the future, but actually, like I said, you're taking twice. You're taking the resources there. For instance, before we get to farming, let's just think about like fishing, for instance, right? If you just take all the fish there and then you say, okay, but I might need some for tomorrow or next week. So you take even more than what you were going to take originally. So you take twice as much as you were going to take. And then now you have to figure out how to store all that, because again, you can't eat it all the same day. So now you're taking even more land. So maybe a little bit three times, right? You're taking even more land to say, okay, I need to store it here. I need to dry it. I need to do all this stuff, right? And now, since you're taking twice from the environment, it's going to be twice as less in the environment. I'm not saying that's not a good way of saying it, but you know what I mean. Like there's even less in the environment. And so if you want even more from the environment, whether it's fish, but berries, whatever, you have to give it time. But you don't want to give it time, right? You want to stay there and keep getting more and more and more. And so the only way to do that is to expand, is to stay in that one spot and go out and get more and bring it to where you are. So it's like you're becoming more like a cancer. You kind of root yourself there and then take more of the environment and to feed yourself, to feed your culture. And this is how empires grew, right? This explains so much about how an empire, or how rather a society becomes an empire, and why empires became so popular. It wasn't a thing about, evolution and becoming more mindful, or more civilized or anything like that. No, it's just common biology, right? It's more resources. If you stay in one spot and you don't let the spot replenish, you have to extend further out to bring more of that in. But if you don't give that environment time to replenish, what happens? It dies, right? And you can actually plot this out in the geographic data. Wherever societies began using agriculture, the environment began to experience more and more desertification, right? Land became drier, then became, arid, and then became a desert over time. And you can see this with the Sahara, across South America, across places in America or North America, Asia, right? You can see this trace of this increase of desertification, and things like that. And we see that today with the Amazon rainforest, right? This huge, amazing jungle that supplies the world's oxygen and all this other stuff, right? It's being destroyed, it's being cut down and burned so you can make more farmland, right? So again, we see the same issue happening. So yeah, it's really a matter of I wouldn't call it an evolution, right? I wouldn't call it becoming more civilized. It's just if you can't call it a cancer, but it's really becoming more centralized in your resources, and becoming less and less sustainable. So it's a wonder we even lasted this long with this sort of thing. Um, but it just shows you how big and bountiful the world is, but we're approaching that end. So this is why you have to change. Let's continue. Numerous civilizations have collapsed because they destroyed their soil through deforestation. The danger of soil erosion is accentuated in mountainous terrains such as the New Guinea highlands, where heavy rains can wash away the denuded soil en masse. A more intelligent practice which the farmers in New Guinea perfected is silviculture. Ooh, I never heard of that. Integrating trees with the other crops, combining orchid field and forest to protect the soil and create symbiotic chemical cycles between the various cultivated plants. See, this is a good kind of a good compromise, right? So yes, we might still need farms and things like that. So why not we, create this like this forest? Like I think this is like the maybe this is the beginnings of a permaculture or a food forest, right? Where instead of you just having miles and miles of farmland, right, which only can last so long, instead you create an actual ecosystem, right? So you farm, you have some farming areas, but then you have trees that solidifies the soil, and you have some irrigation running through there, which is basically rivers and things like that. So we can create our own ecosystems, right? We claim that we're intelligent, and yet all we're doing is behaving like a cancer. Instead, we can be behaving like a symbiotic creature, creating more and systems and environments for other creatures to exist rather than just us, right? This is the pride, this is the real benefits of human sentience, in my opinion. It's not creating more and more, stuff for our cities and things like that. Yes, it's cool to have a big old city, but if nothing else can live there except for us, then we're literally just a cancer. Instead, or a parasite, whatever you want to call it. Instead, we can be creating, these ecosystems for multiple things to live in, for all these animals and plants and other stuff like that. Good stuff. The people of the highlands developed spatial, special anti-erosion techniques to keep from losing the soil of their steep mountain valleys. Any particular farmer might have gained a quick advantage by taking shortcuts that would eventually cause erosion and rob future generations of healthy soil. Yet sustainable techniques were used universally at the time of colonization. Anti erosion techniques were spread and reinforced using exclusively collective and decentralized means. The Highlanders did not need experts to come up with these environmental and gardening technologies, and they did not need bureaucrats to ensure that everyone was using them. Instead, they relied on a culture that valued experimentation, individual freedom, social responsibility, collective stewardship of the land, and free communication. Beautiful. Effective innovations developed in one area spread quickly and freely from valley to valley. Lacking telephones, radio, or internet, and separated by steep mountains, each valley community was like a country unto itself. Hundreds of languages are spoken within the New Guinea highlands, changing from one community to the next. Within this miniature world, no one community could make sure that other communities were not destroying their environment. Yet, their decentralized approach to protecting the environment worked. Over thousands of years, they protected their soil and supported a population of millions of people living at such a high population density that the first Europeans to fly overhead saw a country they likened to the Netherlands. Incredible, right? Like this is a little like these little islands. I mean, they're pretty sizable, but millions of people on these islands, right? Um, Today we try to think about these things and we think it's impossible to do so because we point to like Easter Island, but it ignores the fact that it's a matter of your social organization, right? It matters if it's if it's hierarchical or egalitarian. So I love that. Water management in the lowland northern country in the 12th and 13th centuries provides another example of bottom up solutions to environmental problems. Since much of the Netherlands is below sea level and nearly all of it is in danger of flooding, farmers had to work constantly to maintain and improve the water management system. The protections against flooding were a common infrastructure that benefited everybody, yet they also required everyone to invest in the good of the collective to maintain them. An individual farmer stood to gain by shirking water management duties, but the entire society would lose if if there was a flood. This example is especially significant because Dutch society lacked the anarchistic values common in indigenous societies. The area had long been converted to Christianity and indoctrinated in its ecocidal hierarchical values. Yeah, Christianity, oh my goodness. For hundreds of years, it had been under the control of a state. Through the empire, though the empire had fallen apart, and in the 12th and 13th centuries, the Netherlands were effectively stateless. Central authority in the form of church officials, feudal lords, and guilds remained strong in Holland and Zealand, where capitalism would eventually originate. But in northern regions, such as the Friesland society, was largely decentralized and horizontal. Interesting. Like you can have them like real close to each other. Like technically they're in the same region, but you can see this difference in and social organization. Whew. All right, about to wrap this up. At that time, contact between two dozens of ta- between towns dozens of miles apart, several days' travel could be more challenging than global communication in the present day. Despite this difficulty, farming communities, towns, and villages managed to build and maintain extensive infrastructure to reclaim land from the sea and protect against flooding and fluctuating sea levels. Neighborhood councils by Neighborhood councils, by organizing cooperative work bands or dividing duties between communities, built and maintained the dikes, canals, sluices, and drainage systems necessary to protect the entire society. It was a joint approach from the bottom up, from the local communities that found their protection through organizing themselves in such a way. Nice. Spontaneous horizontal organizing even played a major role in a feudal areas such as Holland and Zealand, and it is doubtful that the weak authorities who did exist in those parts could have managed the necessary waterworks by themselves, given their limited power. Though the authorities always take credit for the creativity of the masses, spontaneous self-organization persists even in the shadow of the state. Right. This is a really short section, but I'll do it next time because my mouth is dry. And I did want to make like shorter videos, somewhat. I got a lot of things planned. That whole newsletter I wrote last week or last month, or really, oh no, it was the end of 2021. I want to use those sections and these videos. So I want to make like little 3D models of that my ideas because I kind of visualize some ideas for like what societies could look like. So I want to kind of visualize some of that and like talk through it as I do a talk like this. So. Um, we'll see if we can get that going soon. But yeah, as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you learned from this. If you have any thoughts or lessons from this and things like that. If you want to do some projects together, I'm super down. I've given myself a lot of projects already, but I would love to do something to really make a difference. You know, I'm down. I'm restless. I want to make things happen. Um, but I personally I find a hard time just doing kind of small things like little community kind of volunteer stuff. Like it just feels like I'm running on a treadmill that's not really getting anywhere. So I'm personally what I'm good at is like you see here is thinking, big thoughts and kind of planning and strategizing these things and putting together these big plans and things like that. Not saying is more valuable than what other people do because we do need people on the ground doing this other stuff. But I'm just a strategy type of person, so I want to do more work like that. So if you're like that as well, hit me up. I would love to work together. And yeah, thanks as always once again. Have a great day. See ya. Bye.